Welcome to the EdTech curriculum. I am your host, Nicole Poff, and I'm really excited about today's conversation. I met today's guest a while back, and we've continued to just have good conversations. So before we get started, Rex, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm excited to jump in, but can you tell us a little bit more about who you are, what you're working on these days?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, so I'm Rex Holiday, as Nicole has said. Um, my latest projects are really in the EdTech industry, and that is taking a long road to get to where I am today. I began my career in wireless telecom and got very interested in how training was being developed. And I noticed that a lot of the training was really what they might call cookie cutter for five different engineering functions and roles. But I thought, well, this is a real waste of money and time. We would spend 40 hours a week in training, and we know that normally you might remember less than 70% of what you've learned at the end of that training, but the training was only covering about 10% of what each engineer needed to know. So it was even less effective at the very end due to this cookie cutter format. So I reached out to our instructional design department and just kind of got involved in shadowing instructional designers, looking at how they were developing this training, and started working with some of the companies that developed training for that company, that organization, and was able to tweak the training so that it was reduced down to maybe 48 hours. I mean, actually 16 hours, 2 days, instead of the 40 hours. And then the outcomes were great. The feedback from the engineers was great, and ended up pursuing that my doctoral dissertation research on the outcomes for wireless communications engineers and how they were learning based on instructional design theories. So yeah, that brought me to where I am today. I've developed products based on that experience, and the Training Needs Analyzer brand is all based on 15 years of experience in that industry. So
Awesome. And Rex, you and I were just talking before the show about, the founder life, right? It's a little bit different when you're on someone's payroll versus when you're have made the bold move to go out on your own and create something new. What was the tipping point? What made you decide that building new would be better than fixing what was already out there?
that's a good question. One of the things that I noticed is that working as a consultant and also working full time in instructional design roles is that a lot of organizations don't want you to touch what you know is broken. They just, and I understand that because there's cost involved, there's time involved. They have customers who are receiving this content, and it's just a real chore to do an overhaul. But a lot of it needs to be overhauled because it's outdated. It isn't applicable to the current trends that we're seeing in the industry, in most industries. For example, generative AI is just taking the industry by storm in every different role that you can think of. So I thought, well, I'm not going to fight with them. I know it needs to be done. I've been on the front line. I've seen this as a worker, as a student in higher ed, and also as a professor in higher ed. And I said, well, you know, find us, offer a solution. I mean, I can complain all day long,
Yeah.
but it was time to offer a solution, and I knew I had some good ideas that I wanted to kick around, and we started building some source code and prototypes, and then went to our chief of operations, who I mentioned earlier in our conversation, And yeah, he was able to develop these apps and these platforms. And so now we're going a step further in developing those apps and platforms. But they're completely usable now. They're available to end users, to organizations. But that was the tipping point for me, was that I knew I couldn't touch what they had, and they had legitimate reasons for not allowing me to change what they had. And I figured, well, I can show them what I'm talking about. A picture's worth 1,000 words. So
Absolutely. And when we talked, probably the first time, something you mentioned was that by time most companies roll out training, it's already behind, right? They developed it.
mhm,
It took so long to develop that by time the content goes live, it's almost not obsolete, but it's not as up to date as it needs to be for that moment in time.
mhm.
Why do you think that the traditional timeline is so slow? And then also the second point to this, what's at stake when we go this slow? What's at stake?
So I think one of the things that really slows the development time down is that it has to go through so many bureaucratic processes within an organization. Money is the bottom line, and so it'll go to individuals who are in charge of budgets, but they really don't understand the need for the training content because they're not really part of that experience. They're not on the front lines. They're not part of the technical team or the sales team or customer service team. They're just individuals who are looking at the bottom line and say, we can't afford to do this, or we can't afford to do this now, or we need to trim this down. And that's what I see a lot. Still, they'll take something that's really adequate and efficient, and then they'll trim it down to save money, and then they'll end up with something that's inadequate and inefficient. And what's at stake is that you end up with individuals who are not skilled in the way they need to be in order to be productive. And so overall, it affects the profits. It affects customer service. It affects how competitive the organization is within their industry. So, but they don't see that big picture. They just see, we have to make sure that this fits into the budget. I also wanted to mention that one of the things that really hurts a lot of organizations is that they won't include all of the individuals who are responsible for this training. They just look at the senior management and the C-suite, but they don't get down to the frontline level, and that is really where the experience is. Those are the ones who know that this concept, this theory, is working in application. We can actually apply this uh, in the real world, but they don't include those individuals. And by the time it gets to where it needs to be used and to educate these individuals, it's not a really good design. It's really inadequate.
Absolutely. And I think so many times people are stuck in the like, we have to build a PowerPoint. That is going to be the best way to train people, to do this is a PowerPoint. When really, that might not be exactly what the needs are, right? Based
Mhm.
on the circumstance or the conditions. What are some common assumptions you see companies make about training that actually end up costing them time, impact, etc.?
Well, one of the common mistakes I see, I'd mentioned earlier, and that's this whole cookie cutter, mentality that, okay, we can take this training. This is about a particular skill or a concept, and we're going to take this and we're going to apply it to this broad area, all of these roles. But it really is not going to be effective if they do that. For example, we had design engineers. The design engineers are looking at the theory and the concepts, and they'll see this, a very very deep in a level uh, um, a perspective on how this particular thing works. And then we had what we called equipment engineers. The equipment engineers were really focused on the equipment. And so they needed to understand the hands-on of this thing, how the power is going to be connected, how the floor loading, is this going to be too heavy for this building that we're going to place this in. And so two totally different perspectives, but it's on the same technology.
Mm.
But those who are in the position to make decisions on what kind of training you're going to receive, they don't understand these nuances. They just see that, okay, this is going to be 5G, for example. And then there's just have this blanket, um, uh, training. This is kind of an overall viewpoint of training and all these formats. And there's just not effective. And I see that in a lot of different roles and organizations in different industries, not just wireless telecommunications, but just across the board. This is the thinking that goes into training. And a lot of times it's the first in the shopping block too. That's another problem with training, is that it's seen as a very it's not a high priority. It's a very low priority for them. But that's a mistake. It really is. You're going to cost yourself a lot of money and resources if your personnel aren't properly trained. I'm not
Absolutely.
sure if I stayed on topic there, but
No, you're right. No, you'd say totally on topic. I think too, cutting the like I think you hit the nail on the head with just cutting the L&D costs when you need a cut budget. Those instructional designers get cut real quick, right? Because they're not the
Mhm,
salespeople, they're not
mhm,
the customer service people. It's like they're almost seen as a nice to have, but really the perception should be different, because if you have bad customer service people who are not properly trained, your company will see negative impacts there. If your salespeople are not trained on all the various, functionalities of whatever your product offering
mhm.
are, you'll
Yep,
see impact there. But it's like, oh, we're in tough times. Cut learning and
yep,
development. Easy cut.
yep, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, one thing you're passionate about is, you always say, actually helping people learn, right?
Mhm,
And that sounds really obvious. Like, obviously, that's all what we want to do. But it's
mhm.
not often or always time the focus. So, what's my question here is, what's missing in how most organizations approach that knowledge transfer?
That's a good question. One of the things that's missing is making sure that the knowledge, the learning content is applicable. It really is. A theory is just a theory, and it's just words if it's not applicable. If you can't apply that theory, it's just a nice, saying, and it really is nothing. It has to lead to an actionable skill, a skill that you can use, something that can be applied in the role that you're in. So I think that's the one thing that's really missing, is that they don't look at how is this knowledge going to lead to this individual being able to apply this in their role. And I think backward design is one of the ways that people can fix that. In fact, um, you know, I don't know if you're ready to talk about the products of training these analyzer yet, but that's how we design. We designed the product to be a backward design. If you look at the training needs analysis tool, that really is backwards design. We start with the end in mind, and that's how you're able to input this data into the tool, and then it gives you a summary based on a learning theory and different learning models um, applicable to that skill that individual needs to learn, and so, or that organization needs to learn. And so we even have it down to the modality. Is this going to be online asynchronous? Is it going to be online synchronous? Is it going to be in person? All of these things impact how learning and how knowledge is transferred, and how this individuals are going to be able to retain and then apply the knowledge. So,
I love that. I think starting with the end in mind is a really good design model, and oftentimes it's skipped, right? Oftentimes when you start a course development, a SME might say it's going to be this, 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 and this, right? And we're going to use this platform, and we're going to add it's like if you were to design a PowerPoint and you know that you have a text box option, you know that you can add some shapes. So
mhm,
you're working within what you know. You're picking the system or the product or the delivery method versus thinking about the end. What's the
mhm,
optimal experience? What are we trying to actually do here? And then working back here. It's a complete shift
mhm,
in how we approach things. I've worked in groups where they're like, we have to do a PowerPoint. And then once we actually talk about what we need, it's like, oh no, we really just need a conversation. Like,
mhm.
we just need a conversation. We don't need a PowerPoint. But
Right.
we're so stuck in the models in which we know,
Mhm.
the delivery in which we know, that then we design trainings to fit those versus the opposite way. So I love this approach you take, which is, the end in mind.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, go on.
Yeah. One of the other things that I wanted to mention is that we also look at the skill level or knowledge level of the user, because you don't want to assume that people just know this.
Yeah,
And so we always build in a beginner, intermediate, advanced, or an academic level, so that the content that is generating is going to fit that individual's aptitude. So,
that's awesome. And Rex, how do you think? So there's instructional designers, there's L&D people. I mean, the titles are very wide in terms of people who create trainings or learning experiences. How do you think they can design for application and not just information, right? Not just to dump information. How do they do that? What does that look like in practice?
well, you have to know what you want to achieve. You have to look at what your KPIs, what are the learning outcomes, what are the organizational goals, what really needs to happen. Again, this whole idea of beginning with the end in mind. So yeah, I think that it looks like just knowing who your audience is, where you want to end up with it, instead of just assuming that you have a topic and then we're just going to go along with the way we've always done things. Yeah, you think to think outside of the box and to apply some critical thinking to it. Repeat your question again. I want to make sure that I'm answering it.
No, that was helpful. Which is, what does
Okay,
it look
good.
like in practice? Yeah, that was
Hmm.
good.
Okay, good.
Okay, so I want to switch a little bit. So you've named your company
Hmm.
after probably one of the most overlooked steps in the process, right? Which we know is that needs analysis. It's very easy to just jump in without looking at without assessing and actually figuring out what's needed. This is a two-part question for you.
Hmm.
Why do you think this is skipped the most? And what are the consequences? When we skip this, what's the result?
Well, for the first part, I think it's just a lack of knowledge. They just really don't understand how important it is to have that needs analysis. They just want to get this training over. It's a checkbox.
Yep.
They say, yeah, this has to happen, so we're going to make it happen. But they don't understand if you don't do the needs analysis, your training is not going to hit the mark. It just won't. It's a very low possibility that you're going to achieve what you want to achieve with that training.
Yep.
And so, what was the second part again, Nicole?
What are the consequences when you
Oh,
skip it?
well, the consequences is a loss of time, money, And then, of course, uh, we already know, as we mentioned earlier, that you're not going to retain a whole lot of what you learn after 24 hours. That 70% of that knowledge is gone. If you begin with content that's really not even meeting your needs of the individual role, then there's even less retention there. So it's a waste of time. It really is.
Yeah. Now, one thing you talked about before was replacing these long timelines with rapid prototyping.
Mhm.
Talk about that. What does it look like? How does it actually help? Just talk more for people who may not know about an alternative to,
Mhm.
well, this is the way we've always done it, is these long timelines. What is rapid prototyping?
Well, when I talk about that, I'm really talking about the training needs analysis tool.
Yeah.
So that's what that's how we designed it. We designed it so that it would. I mean, it's in a model on our website. Do it in half the time. So what it looks like is getting all the information up front that you need. You need to make sure that you know what the role is, specific role that the training has to go to. Don't assume that you can just use the same training for multiple roles. Doesn't work. You're going to disengage the learner. They're going to sit there and go, this has nothing to do with me. I'm going to look at my phone. I'm going to clock out and I'm gone mentally. You need to look at what the organizational goals are. How is it going to impact the organization? What are the key performance indicators? What specific skills do you want the learner to acquire at the end of this course? What's going to be applicable at the end? And then look at the modality that you want. Again, it really does matter. It matters if this is self-paced, then usually it has a lower priority. It's not really, you know, most mandatory training shouldn't be in a self-paced format. It really should be something that's synchronous, because if it's mandatory, that means it's a very important skill for that individual to know. That means there has to be in real-time feedback, so that they're getting that immediate feedback. So we built in that, the modality. Make sure that you know what modality fits that particular training, and then plug it away. I think if you use that process, even without the training needs analysis tool, you're going to streamline the process if you can have all that information up front. But a lot of times, one, two, or several of those key components are missing. They just People just skip over them. They don't. And I think it really is a lack of knowledge a lot of times. I don't think it's intentional. They
Yeah.
just don't understand how important it is to have that information.
When I think a lot of people in the kind of L&D field, it was kind of like accidental, right? I mean, there's literally
Mm-hmm.
a book called like The Accidental Instructional Designer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really, when I think about college, I don't think of anyone who's like a 18-year-old student saying, I want to be an instructional designer, right?
Right.
They're going out into the world in different ways,
Mm-hmm.
and then they're learning, oh, I might want to develop some trainings, right? And so then they fall
Mm-hmm.
into it without that maybe formal training, or maybe they're a design person and they're good at making PowerPoint, so training feels like a good natural fit. Or maybe they're a really good salesperson and it's like, hey, teach people how to be a good salesperson like you, right? And so they don't have that, like you said, they don't have the knowledge or the formal training. They just know that they're good at their job. They're like
Mm-hmm.
a SME. But what
Yeah.
they really need is kind of a companion that will help them form the training, think about all of these things. So it
Mm-hmm.
kind of it sounds like you took what, like maybe a traditional instructional designer who is formally trained,
Mm-hmm.
who would partner with a SME.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like you took some of their qualities and turned it
Mm-hmm.
into a digitalized companion for the SME. Does that feel
Yes.
accurate?
That's very accurate. Very accurate. We're talking about accidental instructional designers. That's my story. I didn't even know what an instructional designer was when I did the job shadowing. I knew that we had a learning and development department, and they called them workforce development and at the time. And they said, "Would you like to job shadow our instructional designer?" And I said, "Sure. What is that?" But yeah, and it was a great experience for me. The individual was very sharp, and we still stay in contact. And yeah, he's surprised at how far I've gone with it. To go from the wireless telecom engineering to instructional design. But I love the field, and no, you're
Totally.
absolutely right. That is exactly how we developed our platform. You're right. You nailed it.
That's awesome. Now, one thing with training or courses or whatever is if we invest money and time and resources into the training,
Mhm,
oftentimes we let it stay in its current state for some time. Like in higher
mhm,
ed, we typically let a course sit there for 3 to 5 years before we do any major revision to it. Again, because it was an initial investment and we want to see that investment out.
mhm,
But 3 to 5 years, let's say, especially for like a marketing class, that's really long when our now is changing, when marketing is changing all the time. Your customers in a
mhm,
business organization, your customers are changing, the demographics are changing. We really can't afford to let a training be built
mhm,
and then sit when now, this concept of now, user, students, fill in the blank, is just changing so rapidly. So I want to talk about that for a little
mhm,
bit.
mhm.
How, my question is, how do you think we can design training that evolves with now or that stands the test of time a little bit better?
Oh my goodness! I actually wrote a LinkedIn article about this very topic. And my thoughts as you were talking went back to some of my university professors, and they would come into the lecture hall with these three ring binders or spiral bound books that they made you pay for. You had to buy them, but they were notes that they had taken over the years. But they hadn't added anything to those notes in, I mean, a decade maybe. And I thought, well, this is interesting. This is not relevant to what we're learning here today. Even the textbooks, they changed those every year.
Yep.
You couldn't even sell them at the end of the semester because they
Yep.
were obsolete, and they had the new edition. But here, this professor was teaching. So yeah, that's very true. So the content, and we'll stick with higher ed here because that's a really good an example of where the content is just they don't want you to mess with it, and they're very slow to change. Um, I mean, I'm relatively new to higher ed. My first teaching job was in 2020, and we all know what happened in 2020.
Yep.
And so I was hired to design and teach an instructional design course for the University of Utah. And that was one of the things that happened in 2020 was that there was a reckoning. All of a sudden, holy cow, this stuff doesn't work. We need to change how we're doing this, and so that was a wake up call, I think, for most higher ed institutions, and they're seeing another one now with the advent of generative AI. We one of the universities that I work for, I'm a team leader for an AI research project, and they have 27 teams. That's how. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of
Wow.
money being invested in AI research, and it's all around how AI has been used in education. So, I mean, that's just one example right there. But yeah, you have to evolve with what's happening around you. And I think that happens with a lot of institutions. You get so involved with there's a culture in the academy, and people sometimes they don't see beyond that, and
Yeah.
so they're just kind of stuck in the way things are happening within the academy. But you have to remember that these students that we're educating have to go out into the real world,
Yeah.
and they have to have skills that are applicable to what's happening right now, what's relevant to their roles. I'm hearing a lot of corporate and their HR and recruiting companies are saying a lot of these students that come in here, they don't know how to work in an actual work environment. I did a poll asking, should we have internships? Should internships be mandatory for all of the degree programs now, so that these students are actually getting some hands-on, real-world experience before they graduate? And it's a real issue, and I think it has a lot to do with the fact that the curriculum just isn't evolving and adapting to where it needs to be.
Absolutely. Well, and think about it. It looks nothing like the workforce, right? Everyone has the exact same assignment. You're not encouraged to collaborate on your assignments. All of your deadlines are the exact same. In what world would you ever go to an employer and all new hires, it's like you're going to do the exact same job, you're going to be working on the exact same tasks. Don't collaborate with each other because that's cheating, right? Like it's so far away from what they're stepping into. I mean, beyond just the content needing to be more relevant, the entire realm in which the students operate is so far from the workplace
Yes,
that it's no wonder
yes,
they're not getting prepared because we literally are conditioning them to not collaborate, to
yep,
not discuss with their peers. Um, that
absolutely,
it,
absolutely.
it's wild.
It is. You make me think of. I was working with a company that we were doing some consulting in the wireless telecom industry, but we also had a branch where we were creating curriculum for military veterans who are transitioning to civilian careers, and so there was a huge need for that. They had the mentality, they had been trained a certain way, they were thinking the it was an entirely different language
Yeah.
to come from that. Well, that's exactly what's happening in higher ed now. There needs to be some type of transition for these students, for the students coming out of higher ed to transition into the real world and into actual roles and how organizations work. A
Yep.
lot of them are coming in and they have these expectations that um, they're going to be given a certain a format of things, and then they're going to wow you or amaze you with their skills and their knowledge. That's not the way it works. A lot of managers don't want to have to manage employees. It's in the title, but they don't want to have to do it. They want you to be a critical thinker, and I think a lot of students and I was guilty of this as myself. I thought of critical thinking as just thinking beyond the literature, because they had the critical theory and things like that. But it's beyond that. The critical thinking is really thinking of ways to do something differently. But it's learning to work smarter. You hear people say that a lot, and that's what critical thinking is. That working smarter is critical thinking. It
Yep.
really is. It is a type of critical thinking. So,
But yet we don't want students to use AI, which would be a
right?
way of working smarter.
Mm-hmm.
We give them very specific prompts, which I'm not saying that's bad because I think if you're
Mm-hmm.
grading to a rubric, students need to know their clear boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
what we're looking for. But again, if we want critical thinking, but then we're saying you need to identify these five terms, do this,
Mm-hmm.
do this, do this, do this, then we're not really asking them to think critically. We're just asking them to regurgitate the textbook, right?
Yeah.
Like we are so on the bottom of just like memorization. We're just like
Mm-hmm.
recall what you read this week basically and write about it
Yep.
in your paper. We're not actually asking them to critically think.
No.
I
No. No.
I can stay on this topic forever, but I'll move us along because I have
Okay.
a lot of unpopular opinions on this
Oh,
topic.
okay.
Um,
That's
I
fine.
get, I get some nasty LinkedIn comments on this topic because I really do think we need to
Mm-hmm.
we need to be preparing our students for the workforce better. But I'll move us along. So my next question is, let's go back to kind of L&D teams.
Mhm.
What mindset shifts do you think need to happen in order for them to keep up with the future of work and learning? What do you see as maybe current obstacles of their mindsets or ways that their mindsets need to advance? What are your thoughts?
Well, the very first thing that needs to happen is they need to acknowledge that there needs to be a shift.
Yes.
So I think that in their mind, I don't know, it's always worked this way. And if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, it might not be broken, but it's obsolete and it's no longer efficient.
Yep.
So you need we're not all riding horses,
Yep.
across the continent. We're using, transportation. A horse works just fine, but it's not an efficient way of traveling.
Yep.
So that's the first thing that needs to happen. They need to acknowledge that they need to adapt. They need to have a shift. They need to adapt to technology, to the dialogue, to what's happening around them. Some of them just are in denial, and there's also this fear of this is going to replace my job.
Mm.
People talk to this is the funniest thing because if you think about it, they said that about calculators. Math teachers were concerned that calculators would replace them. Well, if a
Yep.
student could just use a calculator, what do you need me for? Well, I challenge anyone to go into any math course that has, that is advanced algebra or trig or calculus or physics or even economics and not see a calculator in that
Right.
class. The professors are using them. They're part of the, when you go and get your textbooks, you're going to see they have a specific calculator that you need to purchase. They
Yep.
use the calculators. They finally figured out, hey, guess what? Calculators are a tool that we can use to assist in learning and teaching these skills. Yeah.
Absolutely.
The,
That's just like the threat of AI right now, right? Is
yep.
it's I saw that the Duolingo CEO basically said, like, I don't know if you saw this. He said AI would replace teachers if we didn't need childcare, which is rude, very rude. And as someone
Mhm.
who uses Duolingo, I'm using it to learn chess. So
Mhm.
I went into it not knowing how to play chess at all, and I now understand the pieces and it's teaching me some strategy, but there are things that I still need humans to explain to me. And when I play a human, like, I think I'm really good at chess when I play AI. And then when I play a human, I'm like, oh, I'm not good at chess. I still have, I'm not good at all. But there's things that, like a stalemate. I
Mhm.
could never understand why we kept ending in stalemate, and it was not explaining it to me. So I had to go to someone who does play chess and say, hey, when my games end this way and it's saying it's stalemate, why is that? So I think going back to it's like it's a tool.
Mhm.
It's getting me there. It's allowing me to practice in bed at night on my free
Yep.
time, but it it's not going to replace me playing chess with someone or those questions that, have a lot of nuance and complexity to them.
Absolutely. That's a good example. Yeah.
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 I was like, oh, you're going to make teachers real mad about that with this statement. Okay, Rex, I see a bunch of books behind you.
Mhm.
Obviously, we're cut from the same cloth here. Um, what, for someone who's an instructional designer, learning and development, someone who wants to be, learn more on the topic, what are your favorite books? What books would you
Oh
recommend?
goodness. I'm going to talk about four books. So, it, you might not think they have anything at all to do with instructional design, but I'll explain why I'm
Yeah.
mentioning those books. The first is Leveraging Learning by Danny Inney, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. But that book changed me. So I was working as a senior curriculum and instructional design manager for a company, and we were doing mostly customer training. And the VP of training said, read this book and then write me a report on what you think about this book. And I thought that was a really strange, request.
Yeah.
But they hired me because I had a PhD in e-learning. So they were looking for, research studies and things like that. So I read that book, and that book is almost prophetic in a way because it predicted a lot of the things that we're seeing right now. So they talked about AI. It talked about how higher ed was really needed to change. It was just too stagnant, and it needed to be more fluid. And so and yeah, just the content just really. I had never read anything that was that critical of higher ed before, in learning and development, but it really laid it bare. So that was a great book for me to read and to learn from. The other one is Writing to Change the World by Mary Pifford. So, my oldest daughter gave me that book. I think it was a Christmas present, and I write. I'm a freelance writer. I like to write. I've been writing for a long time now. But in that book, one of the things that really struck me was that you have to be intentional in what you're doing. And so it's just not just writing because you want to throw a bunch of words onto a page, but you have to be intentional. What do you want to do? What do you want your reader to take away from what you've written? How do you want them to change? What action, do you want them to take as a result of reading your writing? I thought, well, that's interesting. That's, but I apply that to everything.
Yeah.
And so I applied that to instructional design as well, is that it has to be intentional. We can do, you mentioned PowerPoints or graphic design. A lot of companies, so can you do graphic design? They really want to know. Well, anyone can do graphic design now because we all just use AI, and it's awesome. But they really, lean into that. But they miss what they want the content to do. They miss out the learning outcomes. They have a list of learning outcomes, but the content isn't really designed to achieve those learning outcomes. They just, it's a checklist. There it is at the end, or at the beginning of each module, you have your learning objectives, and then but the content doesn't follow it. It's just completely disengages from that. It goes off the rails. So that book really taught me that it needs to be intentional. And I'm going to shamelessly mention my own book
Yeah,
that I co-wrote with the late Steve Sontag. Steve Sontag was a K-12 instructor. He taught Spanish and English and math in high school and middle school. And he did that for 40 years. He passed away suddenly at the very end of 2020. But he mentored me, and we wrote a book called The Family Link to Education, The Road to Personal and Professional Success. And in the process of writing that book, what I really learned was that if you're not really providing people with access to learn, then it's an oversight. So we have these great institutions. We have all of this information out there, but a lot of people really don't have access to it. They don't know that it's there. They don't know it's available. People talk about these huge endowments and how they're offering free education. Well, there's a large segment of the population right in those communities who don't even know that they have access to those free educations.
Yeah.
So that book taught me a lot about that, and I worked as a school board trustee during the time that we were gathering the information for that book, and we created some workshops for parents. But Steve Sontag was a great mentor for that, and that has really helped to shape who I am as an instructional designer. And then the last one, you're really going to say what? But I promise I'll explain, why I mention it. But there's only one book that every day I get up and I read from this book. It's like my morning coffee, if you will. It gets my day started. But and that's the Book of Mormon, and it shapes who I am because it's part of my religion. But because that book teaches me that knowledge is one of the most important things that we can have. It's the only thing that we'll take with us, if you believe in an afterlife, when you pass from this existence to the next, knowledge is the only thing you take with you. And so knowledge is something that is really hammered in the book, but it also talks about the importance of teaching the next generation that they have to understand how this, they have to have the skills and the knowledge in order to survive. Uh, and I think that's my mindset is that I need to be able to transfer what I'm learning to the younger generation so that they'll have the skills and the knowledge that they need to be successful. So yeah, those are the books that shaped me as an instructional designer. It's really kind of eclectic, and they
Yeah.
don't really fit together. But it really is. Yeah, that's me.
That's so interesting because none of those were books that you would have traditionally seen on a an L&D bookshelf, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's really the spirit of instructional design is learning more about people and experiences. There's a book that I love called what is it called? Educated, and it's
Mm-hmm.
about a girl who was homeschooled and then basically broke free from that. Um, so it was not designed to like teach me how
Mm-hmm.
to write good curriculum, right, or write how to write
Right.
learning outcomes, but the experience alone and hearing the perspective of people or
Mm-hmm.
experiences of people, I think is so just vital in the because we're writing courses and trainings that literally are for real people,
Yes.
that we can't discredit their experiences or, rely too heavily on the theory because I think the experiences are more important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You made me think about experiential learning. You were talking there, and it really is. We bring a lot with us to the learning environment when we're students. Yeah, I think a lot of institutions and professors forget that. I had a course that I was teaching, and and it was a lot of students. It was an international course. It was an MBA level course, and I had one student. I noticed that they were writing in British English. Some of the words were spelled differently. But what
Mm,
I didn't know was that the grammar is different. I didn't know that they have
yeah.
so British grammar is different from the American English grammar, and
Yep.
that student really taught me something there. I thought, well, that's really interesting. I did not know that. I
Yep.
said so, but for this, so I had to explain for this particular course. We are working with the American Psychological Association's APA, for formatting guidelines, and this, specifically their seventh edition. And so I had to teach that. But boy, it was a wake up call for me. I was sitting there thinking, what is going on here? Yeah. So yeah, his
That's
parts of
awesome.
speech are different.
Totally. Totally. Well, Rex, we are at time. I do want to ask one more final question. So you have your company, the Training Needs Analyzer. If someone were interested in chatting more with you, how would they find you? What's the best way to contact you?
Oh, the best way to contact me, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn through my profile and contact me there. You can also contact me through my email address, and that's rex.holiday@traininganalyzer.com. And also, our website has a contact page, and that's Get Training Analyzer. And you go to the contact page at gettraininganalyzer.com. So,
There's lots of ways. You can send a pigeon too, probably.
Yeah.
We accept it. Well, thank you so much for being
All
here.
right,
This
you're
was a
welcome.
fun conversation. I'm excited to learn
Absolutely.
more and to watch your company grow.
Thank
But
you.
thank you so much for just sharing your thoughts and your wisdom. And yeah, thank you for being
Thank you.
here.
Thank you for having me, Nicole. This has been great.
Awesome. And thank you all for listening. We will be back next time with a different guest, but have a good day.